Welcome. We are adding and subtracting radical expressions today. And there are a few things that you need to know. You can only add or subtract radicals if they are considered like terms. In order for radicals to be like terms, they have to have the same radicand. A radicand, that's a new vocabulary word. Radicand means it is the number inside of the radical. So in your first example, the number that is inside of the radical would be the 5. So since both of these terms have that radicand that is a 5, they are considered like terms. So once you have like terms, all you have to do is add or subtract, depending on what you're doing, the terms that are outside of the radical. So in this case, we have essentially 8 plus 3, and then we have that like term of a radical 5. So if you add 8 plus 3, you will get 11. So your final answer is actually 11 radical 5. Seems pretty easy enough, right? Okay, so we're going to move on to a bit more challenging questions. Let's scroll down here. And we have 2 radical 6 minus 2 radical 24. So now if you look, we have a 6 and a 24 inside of the radical. We do not have any like terms. But if you remember from our unit on simplifying radicals, the 24 can be broken down, and here's how we're going to do that. We're going to write radical 24 off to the side of our paper, and what we're going to do is we're going to figure out two numbers that multiply to 24, one of them being a perfect square. So if you think of all the factors of 24, one of them will work that has a perfect square, and that would be 4 and 6. Now, of these two numbers, the 4 is the perfect square, and the square root of 4 is 2, and you're going to drop down the radical 6. So this is how you break up radical 24. Let's go back to our problem. The 2 radical 6 that we started with cannot be simplified any farther, so we're just going to write that just as it is. And we're going to subtract. Here's the tricky part. Okay, so what I want you to do is keep in mind that this 2 is already here. So what you should do is write it down first before you forget, and then what you're going to do is bring over what radical 24 is simplified to, and it's simplified to 2 radical 6. So we're going to do a little dot for multiplication, times 2 radical 6. All right, we're getting somewhere. So our next step is just to kind of clean it up a bit. We still have 2 radical 6 as our first term. And the next term, sorry, it's sloppy, is going to turn into 2 times 2, which is 4, radical 6. Okay. Now, if you noticed, we have like terms. We have our radicands that are the same, both 6s. So now what we can do is just combine the outside numbers. So we really have 2 minus 4. So 2 minus 4 would give us a negative 2. And then we're going to bring down that radical 6. And our final answer is negative 2 radical 6. I could box that in because that is done. Okay, moving on to number 3. Number 3 gets a little bit more challenging because we can break down radical 50 and we can break down radical 32. Neither of these terms are in simplest radical form like we want. So let's start with the radical 50. And what I would suggest doing is before you even break down radical 50 is what you want to do is bring this 5 down because you do not want to forget about this 5, okay? And I would even bring down this subtract 4, this minus, and then we have a 4, just so we don't forget about the 4. Okay, so let's first break up radical 50. And what you have to do is think of two numbers that multiply to 50, one of them being a perfect square. And if you think, hopefully you'll come up with 25 and 2. So radical 25 and radical 2, one of these will be a perfect square, and it is 25. Square root of 25 is 5, so this becomes 5 radical 2. So what we're going to do is bring over this 5 radical 2 in place of the radical 50. So we're going to say this 5 that we already wrote down is going to multiply our 5 radical 2. And then we're going to subtract 4, and we have to figure out what radical 32 simplifies to. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit so I have room to write. And let's figure out what radical 32 becomes. So, two numbers that multiply to 32, one has to be a perfect square. So if we look, we have 16 and 2. And of these two terms, 16 is the perfect square. So the square root of 16 becomes 4, and we're going to bring down the radical 2. So now we are going to keep this 4 here, and we're going to multiply it by 4 radical 2. And it's just a coincidence that I have a 5 and a 5 and a 4 and a 4. So that's not always going to happen. That just seems to be some coincidence that keeps happening. So now we have to clean it up a bit. 5 times 5 will be 25. And we're going to keep that radical 2. And then we have minus 4 times 4 is 16. And radical 2. Now if we look, these are like terms now because we have the same radicand, that 2. So 25 minus 16, that would be 9. And it's 9 radical 2, and that is our final answer. Okay, I think we have a couple more examples left in us. So let's go on to number 4. 4 is 3 radical 3 plus 27. Okay, so if we look here, the 3 radical 3, it cannot be simplified any farther. It's already in simplest radical form. However, this radical 27 can definitely be broken down a little farther. So let's do that off to the side here. And two numbers that multiply to 27, one of them being a perfect square. So if we look, we have a 9 and a 3. 9 times 3 is 27. And of these two numbers, 9 will be the perfect square. Square root of 9 is 3. So we have 3 radical 3 now. That's going to replace our radical 27. So let's bring down this first 3 radical 3. And we're going to, in this problem, add plus 3 radical 3. So we have like terms because our radicand, the 3, number inside the radical is the same. So all we have to do now is take our outside terms, this 3, add it to the 3 over here. 3 plus 3 is 6. And then we have 6 radical 3. That is our final answer. Okay, I think we have one more left. Yes, one more example. Okay. Number 5, negative radical 12 plus 3 radical 3. So if I break up radical 12, there are two numbers that multiply to 12, and remember that one has to be a perfect square. So we have 4 and 3. And of these two numbers, the 4 is the perfect square. The square root of 4, as you well know, is 2. So we have 2 radical 3, and that's how you simplify radical 12. The biggest thing here is you do not want to forget about this negative sign. So you might want to write that down first before you even simplify radical 12 so that you don't forget it. And again, radical 12 simplified to 2 radical 3. And we're going to add that to our 3 radical 3, which clearly doesn't simplify any farther. And now we have like terms again because the 3 inside the radical. So we take our negative 2 and we add 3 and you'll end up getting 1. So there's two ways you can write this. You could write a 1 and then you write your radical 3. Or what you could do is just write radical 3. So it's the same concept that when you have an x, okay, you could write 1x, or you could leave out the 1 and you could just write x, and it means the same thing. So typically you don't see this 1 in front of the radical. Okay, so what I would prefer to see is just this radical 3, okay? And that concludes our notes.